This is ABC13 Community Close-Up. Viva Houston.
Good morning and welcome to Viva Houston. I'm Eric Barajas. Domestic violence is a national crisis. It crosses all racial and ethnic lines. A statewide study done by the Texas Council on Family Violence finds that 77% of Hispanic Texans say they or a family or a friend member have experienced some form of domestic violence in their lifetime. And by the year 2030, more than 12 million Hispanic Texans could be personally affected by it. Experts say it's not a matter of privacy or a matter of family, it's a community problem. So joining us now to discuss the domestic violence in the Hispanic community is Celinda Guerra, manager of hotline services for the Houston Area Women's Center. So welcome to Viva Houston.
Thank you for having us, Eric.
Pretty big number we just started out right there. 77% of Hispanic Texans have either experienced it or know someone that has. And when, of course, we're talking about domestic violence.
It's a huge problem, and as you mentioned, usually we typically think this is something that happens behind closed doors, something that affects the family, but unfortunately it is something that affects everyone, not just the person that's suffering the abuse. It affects the children, it affects the family, and it affects us as a community as we move forward. So
of course it brings us to the issue of what someone can do. We're talking about the victim. They're in this situation. Domestic violence is an issue. There's abuse going on in the household. But you're finding in this study, and of course through your experience, there are several barriers sometimes that prevents the victim from seeking help. One of them can be a language barrier to start off with.
Absolutely. It's not something easy to talk about, and it affects everyone. And in these cases, for example, specifically for the Hispanic community, a lot of time it can be a language barrier, as you mentioned, not speaking the language, not understanding, how do I access services? Are there services out there, that can help in this issue? There's those also that unfortunately, due to their immigration status, are afraid to reach out for help, are afraid to report the incidents to police and talk about it. And then there's shame. As I mentioned, it's not easy to talk about. A lot of times traditionally, around the Hispanic community, you kind of keep the family together. You're not supposed to tear them apart. You kind of like do whatever it takes to keep everyone together, and you kind of stick around for it.
Well, we talk about the language barrier first off. It's really not an issue because at the hotline you all provide, there are bilingual services, correct?
Absolutely. We have a 24-hour crisis hotline available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. And in addition to that, in every language. We had advocates who are ready to talk in Spanish at all times. And then any other language that we may not be able to offer, we actually use an interpreting services that allows us to communicate with everyone.
You also mentioned immigration status, which can be another barrier. And that's something that sometimes the abuser can use as leverage or as a threat. Possibly saying, well, I'll report you if you report what's going on here. But you guys have a legal remedy for that as well.
Exactly. We work with collaborative partners to help us be able to address this issue and talk to survivors that there is help, that they do have rights, that even though they may be immigrants in this country, that there are legal laws and rights that protect them.
And the shame you also pointed out, I think that's a huge issue because, well, across in all families, but of course even in the Hispanic community, there's a high value placed on family. And sometimes the victim can be made to feel that, well, if they report this or they talk about what's going on, they could be the reason the family broke up. And how do you guys address this when someone comes to you with that concern?
Exactly. One of the most important things that we like to do at the Houston Area Women's Center is help individuals understand that we are here to empower them and allow them to make their own choices. We want to be able to clarify to them what all domestic violence is, how it can affect them, the safety concerns that we may have in every situation, because we do conduct danger assessments and also create safety planning with our callers. But being able to really address what the issue is and letting them know that there are other options. So we're not here to judge them or tell anyone what to do, but merely give them the information that they need so that they can make the best decision for themselves.
So let's talk about the person that finally goes, you know what, they're going to break through the barrier, whichever it is, the language barrier, the fear, the shame, even the threat of deportation. If they cross those barriers and call you all, what are some of the first steps they're going to go through to possibly remove themselves and, of course, maybe even their kids out of an abusive situation?
where our hotline is open, as I mentioned, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So typically our hotline is the gateway to our organization. So anytime someone will call the hotline, we'll ask them to share a little bit about their situation if they feel comfortable.
Okay.
And from that, being able to identify any, as I mentioned, danger concerns, create safety planning, talk to them about the services that we offer, which include counseling services, legal assistance group, shelters, because a lot of times in these situations, it is no longer safe to stay home and they might not be able to reach out to other family members. So shelter is also another big service that we offer through the organization that they can access through our hotline.
Which that's going to be a huge, offering right there, a resource, because obviously they're going to have to remove themselves from the situation and go to a local shelter for a while until they can get back on their feet.
Right.
Okay, and now if someone, when we talk about domestic violence, I think a lot of people automatically just think of physical and sexual abuse, but you guys also list, verbal abuse as part of domestic violence.
Absolutely. Verbal abuse is something that we typically ignore. A lot of people, when we think about domestic violence, we think it's the purple eye that someone has, it's the hitting, it's something that leaves a mark. And usually with domestic violence, one of the things that's important to identify is that it's a cycle of violence. So it can very well start with verbal and emotional abuse, in which the other person is really intimidating the other, insulting them, making them feel bad about themselves, lowering their self-esteem, and then eventually goes into other issues such as a physical abuse.
Okay, we've got just a few seconds left, but if somebody finds themselves in an abusive situation, you would just urge them to first just call the hotline, correct?
Absolutely, and something very important to know is that our hotline is confidential. They don't even have to give their name if they call us.
Okay, well, I know we have the information up right there, and I think it's very important what you just mentioned. It is confidential. They don't even have to give their name. They can just get a feel for the services and resources you guys offer.
Exactly.
All right, Celinda with the Houston Area Women's Center, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.